Hello AP Biology students, let's go over the 7th section in Unit 7. And in this section, we're going to cover different types of natural selection. And these 3 different types of selection are called disruptive, stabilizing, and directional. Our first type of selection is going to be stabilizing selection. This is where there's going to be a selection against the extreme phenotypes. Think of this graph as being like the phenotype range, where you have a bell curve of different phenotypes. You can see in this graph that the ends here, or the extremes, are going to be selected against, while the middle here is going to be selected for. In other words, the extremes are going to have a lower fitness compared to the middle, which has a higher fitness. So what we see in the next generation is more individuals here closer to the medium range than the extremes. This essentially narrows or brings in this bell curve of phenotypes. An example of stabilizing selection is human birth weight. This occurs because there is a higher death rate for the extreme birth weights, either on the large or smaller spectrum. So there is a selection for a medium weight here in the middle, which is an example of stabilizing selection. Our next type of selection is called directional selection. This is where the extreme phenotype on one end is favored. This is going to move the bell curve in one direction. You can see in our original graph here, there is a selection against this side and a selection for one side. So our bell curve is going to shift in one direction. An example of directional selection is the ancient horses from millions of years ago have gotten larger and larger and larger. So through millions of years of natural selection, ancient horses went from being about the size of a dog to what they are today. Our last type of natural selection is called disruptive selection. This is when the two extremes are favored instead of the middle phenotype. So you can see in our graph, the middle fitness here is selected against, while the extremes are selected for. This creates this disruptive bell curve where we have 2 peaks instead of 1. An example of this is like a mice species that lives in light and dark colored rocks. There is an advantage for being light or dark, but not in the middle. So this is going to change that species and have a disruptive selection effect.